Just because you're popular and you get elected, it doesn't actually mean you have a background in that space.
Assume that companies are going to come in and fill in the gap for the NHS because it's not operating in the best way. I think it's a big ask, right?
Nobody expects to be at a company for 40 years. Heck, most tech people aren't even there for 3.
For every £20 spent on intervention in the UK, £1 is spent on prevention.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Yep, this is the Friends with Benefits podcast. I'm David, one of the hosts, one of the founders here at Ben, joined by Carl, who's sitting out remotely today. And we have a really special guest in Steve Bianchi, somebody who I've known for a few years now and has a really interesting perspective on rewards. So yeah, without further ado, really help to introduce Steve and have a great conversation. And maybe we start there, right, Steve? Would love to have a bit of an introduction, understand a little bit more about your background for the folks in the audience.
Sure. So Steve Bianchi, as you said, I've started my career actually not in the HR space. I was actually a systems analyst first. It's very technical. And then I moved into financial systems, and then from there into the finance function proper. And then ultimately, by happenstance, I got pulled into the HR function at Unilever. Basically, the person who used to do the equivalent of my role left the company because her twins came early. They had no backfill, and I got...
You became the backfill.
So my first roles were building the people analytics capability at Unilever. This was probably before people called it people analytics. Okay. My role sat between the finance function and the HR function. So I was like the business office for people into the HR function. I was able to express people data in terms of financial data, and then financial data back into FTEs and then headcount, which meant that I was able to align things with strategic priorities of the company. And then from there, it just kind of spun out. A lot of learnings in that space. And now I have an ecosystem of companies. We work with Silent Partner, which works with SMEs and small teams. We work with individuals through a brand called Secret Sauce. And then I work with private equity and venture capital and larger organizations through Organization Logic. And right now, I'm very happy to be working with a company called Autodoc, which is an e-commerce company that sells automotive parts and aftermarket accessories.
Amazing. And how did you find maybe the transition, before we go into reward specifically, between, the big corporate Unilever of the world with the scale-up startup? How is that?
People ask me that question often, actually. But I think when you work in a big collaborative company like a Unilever, you actually feel like you're in a small team. I don't think I was actually ever in a proper working group of more than maybe 8 people. So even though, yes, I was part of a larger company and larger department, any working group at one time was usually very small. And you develop a lot of very, very deep relationships with people. And you can work faster, I guess. I think the key difference is it's actually behind the scenes. It's things like processes and things you take for granted when you're starting with a company that has nothing. So, you never worried about how to process expenses. You never worried about whether we had Bupa healthcare or whatever, right? It was just there.
Yeah.
And when you go to a smaller organization, they have to actually work these things out.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah. So the first job that I had at Canonical, immediately after Unilever, the hardest adjustment was actually realizing that the numbers in the financial statements were actuals and they were not to the nearest thousandth, right? So, I was off by a factor of 1,000, which affects exchange rates dramatically.
Yeah. Amazing. Look, we like to start with a bit of a segment on the news, right? And so there's an interesting article recently on the FT talking about companies filling the gap left in the NHS in a bit to kind of keep staff at work, and sort of highlighting how employers are getting a bit more involved there, right, with health and different funding options, nutrition. So yeah, any kind of thoughts on the article?
Yeah, but my thoughts might be a bit divided opinion. Okay. So the article is written from the standpoint of employers almost having to step up because the government's cutting back on benefits. And in particular, they're talking about things like healthcare benefits.
Yep.
But what it's not doing is relating it to the motivation of a company to want to do that. And it's also not kind of relating back to the fact that people pay taxes and the government has a responsibility to care for citizens. And so at a base level, my reaction to that article is that you're comparing citizenship with employees. And that's, I think, fundamentally different. So if you're in a country and you're a citizen and you're abiding by the laws and all the other kind of rules and constraints of society, it's different than being a company trying to operate in that ecosystem. And then you get into, where do you spend your money? What are you trying to optimize for? What are you trying to kind of get? And companies will be looking at a return on investment. Okay, no matter how you cut it. If it's a business that's trying to be a going concern, they need to know what the return on investment is.
Yeah.
And the larger the organization, the more stakeholders they have, the more shareholders they have, and the more accountability they have. Whereas one could argue that governments are only accountable at election time. Okay. And the other key difference, too, is the people that are making these decisions. Just because you're popular and you get elected, it doesn't actually mean you have a background in that space. So you still have to rely on a professional workforce to make informed decisions. In a company, the article makes reference to a company doctor. And what they do in the article is they do a breakdown of the time that the doctor spends doing different activities. And ultimately, what they suggest is that the doctor spends 60% of their time dealing with individual care. So really looking out for individual employees. 20% of the time, basically looking at societal concerns. And then 10% of their time kind of supporting the company's objectives. That might be how their effort is consumed. But at the end of the day, 100% of their salary and whatever OKRs or targets they have will be company specific.
Yeah.
So 100% of their salary and their own livelihood depends on the success of the company. So that inherently puts a conflict into that person. And I don't think a company will measure that just by people having access to a company doctor or something like that. And the reason for that, and part of the reason why your company is growing so successfully, is because individual knowledge workers, like a doctor, don't scale. And you need platforms that can scale, and you have to figure out how to commoditize some of that knowledge. And the article cites an example trying to illustrate the value of these programs, and they're relating it to absenteeism. But it specifically calls out a case where an employee was off sick because they couldn't get enough sleep in the night, but the person was consuming, I think it was 19 cans of Coke per day. That has nothing to do with benefits in healthcare. That's education. Okay. And if you look at some of the statistics cited in the article and you think pre-COVID and post-COVID, COVID had a profound effect on what people prioritize. And what that article doesn't kind of compare is the before and the after. So now people had this wake-up call from the pandemic, and they know what's important to them. They're not necessarily optimizing for safety anymore. Nobody expects to be at a company for 40 years. Heck, most tech people aren't even there for 3.
Yeah.
Okay. What are they doing? People are optimizing for optionality and choices, and they want to be able to have the lifestyle that they want. So if you got offered a role at 3, 4, 5 companies, all of which kind of met the profile that you wanted, how would you decide where you want to work? You're going to decide probably based on things that are important to you. Location, quality of colleagues, quality of life ultimately. Will it provide the lifestyle that you want? Culture. All these kind of things. It's not going to be the table stakes anymore, because if I don't offer you the table stakes, you're never going to be attracted to have the conversation in the first place.
Carl, any kind of thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I mean, I so this whole piece around prevention, I mean, it's about something I've been talking about for 10, 15 years, advising companies around it. So I'm quite passionate about it. But I think like whether the move from, or let's say the pressure on companies to intervene in the healthcare space, whether that's as a result of a drive to achieve return on investment, or whether that's trying to fill a void because of a lack of funding by government, I still think there's there's things that kind of seem obvious to me, like the narrative around like benefit in kind taxation on medical insurance and things like that, right? Like what we need to try
Makes
and
no
help
sense.
companies, help if companies are trying to fill a void, then we need to help them fill that void and help
Yep.
the employees, not be sort of penalised for that as well. But I think, at a very high level, I tend to like to keep things at a high level because it's easier for my brain to handle it. But I tend to think that when you've got, I mean, there's an obvious saying, right? Prevention is better than cure. So I just think like when some of the sort of things this article touches on, the medical market in the UK has been, and actually healthcare systems all around the world are built around treating symptoms. So not treating underlying conditions, they treat the symptom, they restore you to your previous state of health. You go away, you probably come back later with the same symptoms or other symptoms as a result of the underlying condition. In healthcare systems, in private healthcare systems, no different. And companies, Mercer did a bit of research a few years ago when I was there. For every £20 spent on intervention in the UK, £1 is spent on prevention. So everyone's trying, I use this bathtub analogy, everyone's trying to find more and more sophisticated ways to bail out the bathwater as it's filling up. Nobody's considering turning the tap off. And I think that's where this whole prevention piece comes in. But it's hard, right? I think, some of the things that you mentioned there, Steve, around, how do you, like, there's some basic healthcare knowledge, does that sit in the benefits world? Don't know, maybe. And then it's the health is so diverse that you need a broad spectrum of sort of preventative measures to capture the demands of the workforce, I guess.
Yeah. I also think it's a huge shift, right? As in like in the UK, it's not like in the US or so where companies are used to spending all this money on healthcare, right? So like how much is there actually, right? And I think to assume that companies are going to come in and fill in the gap for the NHS because it's not operating in the best way, I think it's a big ask, right? Because it's just not how the system operates, because you assume that it's going to be paid out of taxes and things like that rather than funded through other means, right? Privately. So it's yeah, it'll be interesting to see, but there clearly needs to be a better solution, right? And prevention is definitely part of the answer, but kind of a rethinking, Carl, to your point of how this all works, right? And why is it that benefit in kind is paid in private medical but not in life, right? When the system is so clogged up. So I think there's just some like fundamentally rethinking about how this should actually work. And obviously we're not here talking about the healthcare system or politicians in a way, but it does point out to something that isn't working, that companies, government, everybody sort of needs to work together to figure out what the future will be, at least in the UK. Yeah.
And this gets to the point about having the right people think about it.
Yeah.
So for instance, talk about benefits in kind.
Yep.
That is viewing healthcare as a completely, well, assuming healthcare, a completely standalone benefit, and it's a transactional solution. But if you start thinking broader, who actually has a vested interest in the livelihood and the health of an employee as a person? Pension companies. Why does my pension provider not provide me with healthcare? And you can treat it the same way, and it's also portable. So if I change companies, I can continue paying into it and carry it forward. I don't need more underwriting and all that kind of stuff. If I'm healthy, either through preventative means or, if there's something wrong and it has to be activated in a different way, then they can kind of enhance their proposition either to help me live longer and a healthier life, or to help me at the time I need them most. And yes, there's an upfront investment for them there, but it's offset by the pension side of contributions. Right? And it just requires a fundamental rethink on what is the value proposition and why is health disconnected from my ability to live.
That's quite an interesting point, right? And something that we don't think about that often in terms of like where does the funding for these kinds of mechanisms can come from. And there is a lot of other people who are at stake there. So I really like that as a concept or an idea. And which actually gets us to, I think, the meat of the conversation, right? Which, Steve, you have kind of a very, I think, interesting view on how could you build rewards and benefit strategies, and where do you start? What are the principles around it? We had a conversation around it earlier, so it would be interesting for you to go into a little bit of your views or what you're trying to do at Autodoc and our companies would be what an interesting start.
In my mental model that I apply to this, and you'll find the more we talk through this and other topics, I actually think in frameworks, and I transplant frameworks from maybe seemingly unrelated domains, and they just kind of work in my head. So when I look at a benefits proposition from scratch, I start looking at why are people here? Why do they want to be here? Why do we need them here? What are we trying to achieve? Who benefits? And I really go back to first principles on this. And a lot of companies will use benefits as a way to attract employees.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen very few benefits outside of like education allowance and those sorts of things where it's to actually develop people.
Mm.
And the retention is almost kind of blackmailish. Like if I leave, I lose my benefits. And so there's no real concept of lifetime value, either of an employee, the benefit itself, or whatever it is. So I apply these kind of various lenses to my thinking. And I think at a very, very basic level, it's table stakes. There's industry norms. And if you don't meet those industry norms, you have to have a really compelling otherwise proposition. Okay. And we see VC funded startups, for instance, do this. So they might not offer pension, for instance, but they offer you potential to kind of 10, 20x some equity.
Yep.
Okay. And quite often you'll hear that it used to be a reason. Too often I hear it as an excuse as to why they don't have benefits, but they kind of position it that way. And that's the value prop. You come, you work hard, you 10x. Table stakes. After table stakes, I think you have these functional kind of utility style benefits. And this is where it could look exactly the same from a framework, from legal requirement, commitment, all that kind of stuff, the social contract. So the example would be if I'm a salesperson and I travel a lot, I might have a car allowance or a commuting allowance or something like that. And whilst it's positioned as a benefit, it actually helps me do my job. It makes me more productive. I'm really just using the benefit to help the company. It doesn't really help me.
Not really benefits, is it? Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's more of a tool, but we don't call it a tool. Especially from the HR space, we try to sell it as a benefit. And even if you look, it's like fuel tax benefit. The government even categorizes it that way. But if I took that same individual with that car who's in sales and they change jobs and they don't have to travel anymore, and I let them keep the car, now they're using it as a perk or a benefit, depending on use.
Yeah.
And even though no contracts changed, no arrangements have changed, just their role and the intention and why they use it or how they consume it has changed. It means that it's now a benefit to them. And so you have this kind of benefit that actually provides some kind of advantage. Okay. And then you have to ask your question. The root word, benefit, who does it benefit? Okay. So in the tool level example, it benefits the company ultimately. But when you go up that kind of ladder, it actually benefits the employee in this case. Then I think you have these real competitive differentiators. So when you start looking at kind of propositions to differentiate and you tie it with your culture, you can invest in things that you don't open up across the board. You open them up to people that meet some kind of qualifying criteria, and that criteria has to be renewed or refreshed at regular intervals. So for instance, companies talk about how their top performers are the most kind of important asset of their huge asset, which is always their people.
Yeah.
But what are they really doing to differentiate? And how are they trying to motivate people to join that top X% club? And what are they doing to shift the window on the definition of that? So, for instance, somebody who might be a top performer might get access to represent the company at events. And in order to make sure that it works for the company and the individual, we might put them on training. And that training might unlock not just kind of permission to go to an event, but it might come with a bit of perks, swags, whatever. So if I'm going to go to a conference as an attendee, I might just take a quick online course reminding me how to speak about what the company does, what we do, like who we are, all the stats, that kind of thing. I get a t-shirt and I'm allowed to wear that t-shirt. The company pays for my travel, accommodation, and ticket. And the trade-off is I wear the shirt when I go to the conference, and I have to make sure I have a valid kind of pass of that course. If I want to work a kiosk at a show, maybe I have to do the next level of that training, which teaches me how to interact with potential customers or clients, how to engage with them, how to explain the company more professionally, how to hand them over to a proper sales colleague, and not basically lie or make things up or overpromise or whatever it is. And maybe the result of that is the certification, so some kind of different logo or something on Slack, but also maybe it's a polo shirt or a golf shirt. with embroidery, a little more professional looking because it has a collar. I want to present at a conference. Now maybe I work with the communications and marketing team, and they help me make my presentation super polished, like a TED Talk. I do speaker training. I do audience kind of engagement so I can react to the room, these kind of things, and have a really, really high caliber piece of work, really. And maybe I get a long sleeve shirt that's embroidered in there, and I'm on stage, and I get some collateral from the media team of me delivering my presentation. After that, I'm allowed to do some personal branding. Because statistically, I believe it's personal brands are viewed something like 567 times percent higher than corporate brands. Why are we hiding these people? So my basic premise is it almost mirrors like a Maslow hierarchy where you kind of go up through the levels. But the higher you go, for lack of a better phrasing, the less selfish the company can be. The company should be willing to put this kind of benefit out in the open, put their people in the open. And if I'm worried that I'm going to lose a great person because I'm spotlighting them deliberately and with our full investment and backing, then I probably don't deserve to have the great person, right? Someone else should get them. And if we're not willing to kind of stand behind what we stand for, then I think it's open game.
So Steve, it sounds like I may be misreading this, but when you're talking about that, so bringing this into the benefits sort of ecosystem, a lot of companies are moving away from that hierarchical structure around benefits. They're creating a very flat, approach to benefits, rightly or wrongly. You obviously the example you gave there. Do you think that also aligns into the benefits world where, based on performance, based on not necessarily hierarchy, but performance, benefits alter based on ultimately performance, I guess.
Yeah, I do. But not, so if you think back to how I described those levels, table stakes are table stakes, fairly universal. If we believe in certain principles, then everybody should get that by virtue of working at the company. When I talk about differentiation, I'm talking about those kind of things that we invest in that culturally set us apart. Okay, so if you said media training, is that a benefit? It could be. With the right proposition, it could be.
For sure.
Especially in a world where we're moving out of the information economy into a creator economy. People's personal brands. I mean, look on LinkedIn these days. It's all about brand. Right? People will value that. I actually believe in having opinionated cultures. I think cultures that are done well don't have to be aggressive, but they should promote and welcome people that fit with your culture. And equally, it should feel very toxic to people that aren't a fit, because they shouldn't be attracted by it. It should be opinionated. And I think if you have a culture that rewards people, whatever your kind of premise is, then they are really motivated by cultural benefits that actually invest in them and unlock like a different future or a different lifestyle, whatever they envisage.
I think it's a really interesting perspective, right? Because Carl, I mean, you and I would talk to companies all day long around what they're doing with their benefit strategy, and like the majority of them are just, hey, we benchmark, we see what other people are offering, and we tend to kind of offer the same things. And it's retirement, life, health, and like actually the permutations of the things that companies could be doing is much bigger, right? Like all the things that companies could be supporting their people with, but you have to think a bit creatively, right? And I think by thinking creatively, you'll not only create something that's better for the employee, but also better for the company, right? Ultimately, which is the purpose of a benefit. So I think, sometimes I'm a bit jaded at the lack of kind of sort of innovation or the lack of sort of desire to do things that are slightly different, right? Than just because everybody is benchmarked to offer health insurance doesn't mean that I should do it, right?
I think I mean, you've got those standard four, haven't you? Sort of health, retirement, death, and disability. And I think most companies aren't even getting to table stakes. If I'm honest.
No, I agree.
I think I completely agree with the sentiment around who do these things really benefit. I think when you start, I mean, the benefits world has evolved a lot recently, and I think when you start getting into the conversations around assisted reproduction and transgender benefits, right? I mean, they are certainly assisted reproduction. You could argue that's not an employer benefit at all because when people go off on maternity leave or paternity leave, then you're losing that asset, to the business. I guess there are other, probably more
Yeah.
things to consider there in terms of the employer benefits. But they are true employee benefits, aren't they? But
You can warp your mind. You can warp your mind. So let me throw something at you guys. My view is that their career framework should be a benefit.
Hmm.
It's a proprietary benefit
Interesting.
because you can't get that anywhere else. Okay. So let's say that, David, you joined the company and you and I sat down and I said, you're a great fit for this role. How do you want to grow? What are the 3 things you really want to achieve before you personally will be satisfied that you're finished with this job?
Hmm.
And we capture that. And we kind of have a conversation where we set and establish standards and expectations around timing. So, you can't come in and do it all in 3 weeks, right? So maybe it's a 3-year plan. I would encourage you not only to capture those for us in dialogue, but also to put them maybe on LinkedIn and say, this is what you're working on. And then when you and I check in over time and you achieve those things, we want to check it off. I want you to tell the world that you did it. And I want the power of our company social media team to tell the world how awesome you friggin' are. Then I know you've got 2 things left on the list. And as we get closer to one thing, I either got to give you a new value proposition, and I got to help you find what's next in your journey. And if I don't have what's next for you, I have a responsibility to help you find what it is, wherever it is. And I want you to know that you got your next job because you worked here. Now, that's a benefit to me. And it's proprietary, and it's companies can copy it in terms of having comparative advantage, but they can't actually copy the competitive advantage because they're not us.
Yeah. I mean, it's the interesting thing there that kind of came to mind to me was like you're actually taking the concept of this flexible, whatever, personalized benefit to its extreme, right? Which is it's not like, oh, I get this prepackaged thing and then I can flex up or down or think about it. It's more of like, hey, David, what is important to you right now at this point in time? And how do we give you those resources, the thing that matter? And I mean, that is a really compelling benefits program. It's just really hard to do, right?
But the key element, though, is making it public.
Yeah.
Because then it's not something I can hide behind. I actually have the entire, LinkedIn or whatever it is, watching how I behave. Do I do what we say we're going to do? And do you trust me? A lot of people kind of think benefits have to optimize for fair. I actually don't believe in fair. Because what's fair to you and what's fair to Carl, what's fair to me, it's interpretation. It's like saying, what's the truth? You can convince yourself that something happened a certain way, and that's your truth. It might be different from my truth. What we can look at is fact. No argument on facts. Okay. So, and this is me as the data guy. But when I design these things, the first thing I want is consistency. And so that it's universal. There's not some CEO with a magic wand that says, you get this and you get that, but this person doesn't. No, consistency. Second thing is a level of predictability. People know what to expect at various engagements. If you get those 2 things right, you start to form a base level of trust. And people will trust the program, whether it's the benefits program or the career framework, whatever it is. But they will trust the system works. But more importantly, they will trust the leaders. And if the system doesn't work, they will trust that the leader will fix it. And if you add to that this external level of accountability, the world is expecting them to fix it, which means, it doesn't make me a popular person, but it moves the needle.
Carl, you were also going to say there as well, in terms of the philosophy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm all in for greater personalization, right? Like any form of flexibility, choice, personalization in benefits. My mind just automatically goes to how long is the TRS statement going to be now, right? We start having all this stuff.
But that's a thing, though, right? I mean, companies that are growing always talk about attract, develop, retain.
Yeah.
Successful companies retain, develop, attract. And they attract because of the way they do it. And if that means it's a huge scrolling kind of total reward statement, be proud of it.
I mean, it's an interesting kind of approach, right? Like we're obviously doing kind of the total reward thing, but like, does it actually help you to, retain? And is that the be all end all of like, hey, I show you how much you get paid and how much the thing is valued? Like, is that, the end game? What is your feeling on total reward communication, total reward statements, that kind of thing?
I get it from people who want to compare apples to apples and stuff like that. What I don't like about them is people put too much emphasis on rewards that are not tangible. As in, I might have a pension or I don't know, health insurance or whatever it is, it's of no value of me until I need it.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's hard for me to demonstrate the value of something you can't touch. And, VC world has the same issue in terms of that equity we spoke about. It's a promise. Okay. Somebody who's, I don't know, 20 years old, banking on a pension that's maybe going to be 40 or the way we're going 50 years away. That's a long time to gamble. I mean, that's for them, that's more than 3 lifetimes.
Yeah.
Do we trust the government? I mean, just look what's happened in the last, 3-4 years worldwide. Okay. So total reward statement to me need to not just have the whole package. They need to have what do we give you today? How does that evolve over time? And what could it look like later? And time is a key.
I think that's a really profound insight in the sense of like, hey, how do you help employees? How do you help people visualize what the future will look like, right? Because that's ultimately what you want to build that story and then that narrative. And obviously, total TRS is one way of doing that. But it's a really interesting question around sort of these intangibles, right? Because ultimately, companies are spending a ton of money on this stuff, right? The pensions, the healthcare, and things. And ultimately, I guess the question is, do employees actually value it, right? Or care about where the spend is going? And for some, a lot. For others, not at all, right?
No. And you're seeing generational
Go
stuff
for Carl,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Steve. I think like value comes from use, doesn't it? Right. So if you're not using it, you're probably not valuing it. This is why I think a lot of companies actually don't allow flexibility in some of the minimum standards of care they provide to their employees because they don't want them to make bad decisions. Like disability insurance in the UK, right? Everyone would probably flex down group income protection if they had the ability because it's quite expensive. It give them a bit of money back and they probably go and buy, I don't know, travel insurance with it or something. Actually, they probably wouldn't even
travel insurance. I don't think so.
They might do something fun with it, but that's because everyone naively either doesn't think they're going to, get to a point where they need it, or they think the state's going to look after them. Neither of which are true. A lot of people get to a point where they need something like that, or certainly a reasonable amount of people will get to a point where they need something like that. So I think I completely agree. Like the value is not derived from those benefits until they're used, but the value once they're used is unprecedented. So I think that's a difficult.
There's a trick though. So it's around looking at the present value of a future valued benefit. So what can I do with my pension fund, right? And what value does it bring me today? Whilst I might not be able to tap into it, it might give me the value of security for the future. Healthcare, I might not need it today, but it might give me the comfort of knowing that it's there. How do I make the feeling of security, of comfort, tangible now? That's the trick. And sometimes it's simple as talking about it.
Yeah.
Rather than just putting it in a statement saying, as part of working here, you get a statement from some third-party company, and we don't even stick our logo on it.
Yeah.
Like it's too transactional. And if the company can't make the time to pull it into something, then you kind of dismiss it.
I think a lot of people take more value out of something that, so like take life insurance, for example. A lot of people do take value from life insurance because they know it's protecting their family. So they're taking more of an interest in the protection of others than themselves. I think equally things like health insurance, almost when sort of the opportunity or the employer covers families in it as well. I mean, there is an element of status to medical insurance, and there certainly was in the past, but I think once families are then involved, I think again, it is an individual that notion that my family's protected in the event of the worst, those sorts of things. I think there's a lot more value derived in those scenarios than where it's focused purely on the self.
I think it depends on, so again, generationally and demographic. So for instance, a younger employee with no family doesn't understand why they have all these benefits, yet they still have to take out a loan to buy a cheap used car.
Yeah.
Right? Like it just doesn't equate to them. And take life assurance to your example. They might be less concerned around having a legacy to pass on and take care of things, and they might prioritize something like critical illness because they need money to continue living rather than loving money to settle debts or whatever when they're gone.
Yeah.
Flexibility in that regard, or having some kind of shifting window or something, is probably more appropriate.
Yeah, and I mean in general, right? Like insurances, retirement, like these are low engagement. People don't, care about unless they really at the point at which they really need it, right? So like the story is really like, how do you tell something to tell employees, right? And companies offer these things for a reason, which is they want the employees to be looked after at the end of the day and be there when people actually need it, right? But then you need to tell a compelling story and narrative around why it's important to them, and because like
Well, I guess that story changes, doesn't it? Like I
it
think
does.
like taking Steve's point there, like something I guess I don't really consider that often, but if you sort of look through the sort of the the newer generations coming through, like less people are getting married, less people are in long-term relationships, less people are having children.
Less people
So
buying
what is
houses.
important to those people, I guess. Yeah.
You've also kind of got this dynamic where people are willing to trade things now that previously we haven't really considered. So outside of the insurances and that, I was at Radford last January, and I asked them, when are you going to start factoring things like flexibility and remote working into your compensation model for benchmarking? Because I know people that would be willing to work for less, I don't know, salary, for instance, if they don't have to pay for a commute.
Yep.
Okay. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be benchmarked against their peers. It doesn't mean that they make less money, because they probably trade that salary for a richer life.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a benefit? Is that compensation? What is that? Right. And the suppliers don't have a definition for that.
Yeah. I mean, it is this total sort of proposition, right, that is much broader than just reward and things. So which actually gets us to the interesting sort of talk around sort of recognition and how do you think about that within that context as well. I think you have some interesting ideas there as well. So would love to kind of go there.
I think when you think about proposition in general, you have to be an expert in motivation. You have to understand what deeply drives people, what they deeply care about, why they're here. We're seeing this generationally as well. I mean, it's shifting.
Yeah.
And I think COVID kind of amped that up a bit. So when you do this, it's not necessarily just looking at the table stakes and flipping through a catalog and getting quotes. It's around asking why. And why for the company, why for the individual. What does it mean to them? What could it mean to them? And then thinking this kind of present value, future value kind of mindset. So when you design these things, I think there is a large degree of psychology that needs to come into it. I think there's probably I'd say probably anthropology comes into it as well, like the storytelling. So we said a total reward statement. What could it look like in the future? You have to be able to tell that in a logically sound way. You can't just make it up, right?
Some people do, but
yeah. But I think people are wising up to it now.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't had an instance of this yet, but I could imagine if I gave a total reward statement to an employee, first thing they would do is chuck the PDF into ChatGPT and say, tell me if this is any good.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what it would be comparing it to, but it's a large language model. Likely, it's going to normalize to the center, and it will tell me if it's good versus other people's table stakes. If you can have spikes in there, then it will tell you that it's better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting mental model, right, to think about how people will interact with these things going forward, right? And one of the things that I was always, in some cases, pushing companies to do sometimes is actually just showcase, here's where you are, right? And, explain within the compensation philosophy to be very transparent around it. And it doesn't necessarily, as you say, have to be fair, right? But how do you think about that balance of transparency, fairness, sort of,
I'm on the radical transparency bandwagon.
Yeah.
Right. I think that everything should be open unless there's actual specific reason not to be. Mm-hmm. And that may include things like what will drive your premiums up. Mm-hmm. If people know that, maybe they'll change their behaviors, whether it's lead a healthier lifestyle or if it's driving habits. I don't know. But instead of hiding these things to try to game competitors, why not just be transparent and put it on the table? So first off. And then I think it's really explaining to people why we have whatever it is we offer. And that is basically links back to who we are, our identity, our culture, and whether or not this fits with who you are and who you want to be and how we work together. And I think a lot of this is changing from that model of who do you work for to who do you work with. Right? People work with companies now. And you'll see this a lot on social media now. The future it's kind of being said in like those little sound bites and things. But the future is going to belong to the people with the ideas, because now anybody can build. So if you put that into this space, it's going to be the people that can figure out the frameworks and the ways to package and basically hyper-personalize at scale. So for instance, pretty much every kind of company has some form of payroll. I see very few, actually, the only companies I see do this are the ones where I've done it, frankly. Payroll is the most hyper-personalized universal product that I can think of in any company. Everybody gets a paycheck. Everybody gets a payslip. The payslip has your data on it, hyper-personalized to you, and mine is different, even if it's by a penny. There's fields on there where you can put notes. Nobody uses the notes field. Why not send personal messages, right? It's just popping a field, chucking it in that spreadsheet that ultimately goes to payroll. Why can't we think of other benefits in the same regard, right? So even though you might have, this is our standard offering, you can still express what it means to somebody in their terms. So it's changing the proposition and the perspective, even though the actual product might be the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question as well in terms of like how do you frame it in a way that will be as valuable as possible to an employer, right? So like then we have this concept of the allowances, right, that people can spend on things, and a lot of companies are doing this through reimbursements or things like that then gets drowned into payroll, and then people just forget about it. It becomes part of the compensation, and I think that's true with a lot of different types of benefits that companies are offering. Is like it just gets drowned out by everything else, and then a lot of it coming back to like you're just not telling that story of what do you stand for as a company and why are you offering these things and why is it important to me as an individual,
right?
Yeah.
And that's because a lot of these are designed to be open loop systems. So for instance, if I go back to the example I gave around attending conferences or a speaker, the way to make that a closed system is after the event I share, I update my colleagues, the company, and what that should do is have other people saying, hey, that's cool, I learned something, or how do I get to be able to go on one of those things, whatever it's for, right? How come you get a company car? Or why do you get a paid sabbatical? Whatever it is.
Can we touch upon the point around the fairness, right, or the thing there as well, because I think that's quite interesting in the sense of how do you think about these performance-based benefits or so? Is that actually the way companies should think about performing or like structuring benefits packages? Yeah, what's your view?
At a very, very base level, I think performance-based benefits are an incentive.
Yeah.
And I think that you want to recognize and reward people that are motivated by those incentives. It's almost kind of the same principle of having commission for a salesperson, right? They get motivated, usually not by the money. They view it as points and they want to win the game.
Yeah.
Whereas, I don't know, an engineer might want support to get a white paper vetted and be published, or register IP. Or trademarks or something. Marketing people might actually spend more time working with external agencies than they do internal colleagues.
Yeah.
That should feature in the feedback they get and the learning opportunities that are created for them. But maybe you're not at the level where you're ready for me to allow you to work with external people yet. All right. So I think that you can differentiate through tenure. I think you can differentiate through kind of track record of performance. But I also think that you have to requalify for these things. So just because you got it today doesn't mean you can, coast. Next time we refresh whatever that criteria is, hopefully you requalify. But if you don't, it's time to recognize that, the standard is being raised, the bar is being raised. It doesn't mean that your core, like table stakes stuff we talked about, is going to erode. It just means that you're losing opportunity or you're gaining opportunity. And I think it ties into kind of that total reward concept, recognition, right? Motivation, recognition, and hyper-personalization at scale.
Yeah. And ultimately what I like about that, it all has to fit in together, right? Sometimes what we talk about is like there are different people who take care of recognition and benefits and compensation at large companies, and they're all actually not talking to each other or designing a proposition that sort of makes complete sort of sense and all kind of feeding into the same thing. Carl, you were going to say something there as well.
Yeah, no, I like the whole performance-based sort of model. I think it obviously just doesn't work in certain benefit areas, right? Like,
Yeah, we all have 32 teeth. The dental program's the same.
Yeah, like I mean, life-changing, life-saving programs. You're not going to put into a performance-based structure, right? But yeah, the concept of it, I think, is certainly an interesting one. But I think that it's coming back to the transparency piece as well. That bit I find quite interesting, especially with the EU pay transparency stuff that's coming in as well. Like they've actually introduced benefits into that, haven't they? So, I think like some of the notion around what. Well, obviously that benefits piece is going to be made public for those that request it, and I guess for those companies that decide to just release it anyway without request. It'll be interesting to see how perception changes when the benefit landscape across the whole business is
That's
identifiable to
true.
everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Like once things are transparent out in the open, what are companies going to do then, right? And it's when we talking to a lot of reward leaders, is quite scared around the concept, right? But look, I mean, we're coming up for time. I think we'd love to like ask kind of two more questions. One, we had obviously you have a very different sort of background, right, to your most traditional sort of reward, and different people kind of operations. Like, what skills do you think are important for a reward leader nowadays, and the best ones that you work with, right, in your position as the chief people officer?
I think I've seen it evolve from people that are really, really good with data and modeling to people that can communicate the intentions behind those models, but also, stand up at an all hands or something like that and actually convey the purpose of it, not just how it works. So what is the value proposition? How does it tie to strategy? What is the time horizon over which, these benefits actually deliver value to the company and to the employee? And I think it's tied to this distinction between your employment contract and the social contract. And the social contract is what's changing. So you need people that can understand kind of big picture and understand how the slightest detail in a financial model or a benefits model actually relates to it. And by having that kind of level of radical transparency, anybody can ask the question that says, what does this have to do with that? And so they really have to kind of be super clear on it, which means that you can't have people that just say, we need X benefits, so healthcare, whatever, and I'm just going to benchmark and see who gives me the best deal, right? It means that it's all about the why. And that introduces, just by virtue of that question, a very, very different level of strategic thinking to these roles. I think it's also a way for people to communicate that in terms that people understand. So a framework that I tend to use when it comes to these things, I use a palindrome. So radar, R-A-D-A-R. The whole principle around that is that I can present something from left to right, which is top to bottom. So if I were to just do, I'll take a different context just to kind of illustrate the point. Company strategy. Okay. Basically, we want to be a profitable going concern. We're going to do that because our customers are going to love us, because our products are category defining, because we've got the best team in the world that can deliver and create those products. Top down, I can say that to the board. If I'm doing an all hands with my employees, I'm going to say the exact same thing in reverse. So instead of hitting the left arrow on my PowerPoint, I'm going to hit the right. I'm going to say, you people are the best people in the world, and you're capable of creating category defining products that our customers truly love. And that makes us number one in terms of market share and drives financial results. We have to be able to do the same thing with benefits. So comp leaders need to be able to speak to equally to the board and top down and bottom up, but then also recognizing all the subcultures in the company. So if you've got an Eastern culture versus a Western culture, one might be more base compensation cash driven. The other one might be much more around, socially adept benefits. You have to be able to figure out what the parity is. And it's not about the fairness, it's around the perception, the understanding, and the true value proposition. And it's a very different way of thinking, I think, than a lot of analysts that go into that space think at this time.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point around it. It's not just about, again, the analysis, the data crunching, the cost, right? But really about the narrative, the story, the impact that you tell around it. And I think in general, that's sometimes a hard skill, right? It's something that people aren't used to. So that's a really interesting perspective.
So to wrap things up then, Steve, we have this tradition on the podcast of a benefits confession. So I'll tell you mine off air, but I challenge you to beat it. Yeah, we'd love to hear any confession you've got from your experience in HR and benefits.
Sure. It's probably not as controversial or something as I'm sure someone with your depth in this space has. But I think mine is more around misguided kind of intention in principle. And it's got to do with this concept of workation, which, let me tell you, as someone who's been a chief people officer and a chief operating officer, that is a very hard term to sell to a board of directors. Workation. Like, what are people actually doing?
It's hard to sell to employees as well, right? Who wants to work?
Yeah, well, I think they focus on the cation part.
That's the thing, right?
But I don't know. The easiest way for me to explain it would be that the HR function was optimizing so that we could offer a benefit where people would be able to go and work remotely from wherever they want, enjoy time with their family, and be in a different environment, basically. But as you know, if you are in certain roles like sales, you can't sign contracts there, or if you stay there more than usually 20 days, you end up inadvertently setting up a company there, like a permanent establishment, which means you become liable for taxes.
Yeah.
So, in their wisdom, the team asked the legal team for support. But then we had these two completely isolated streams of work where you had the legal sphere optimizing on one side for basically making sure everything was compliant. And then you had the HR sphere optimizing to make sure that everybody could partake and optimally fairness they were going for, right? Universal fairness. The problem is when you put those two circles together and you can make a Venn diagram, the overlap leads to all kinds of problems if you don't actually design with the right intention up front. So this led to situations where people that just joined the company and you're trying to onboard them and depending on your view, so from a people and culture point of view, you're trying to induct them into the company. And then from a business leader point of view, I want to minimize time to productivity. But now these people are on workation during their onboarding. Equally, you might have some people that require a little bit more support, or they might actually be on a performance improvement program. And the moment that that process gets triggered, they're on workation. And effectively, depending on the situation, but you end up with some people that unfortunately try to hide in another country where you can't really contact them, and the best you can get is Slack. And in many countries, that doesn't count as a valid performance improvement program because you're not able to demonstrate what you're doing, and effectively they just got another month's of salary on there. So it's not a huge gaffe, but what it just kind of shows is you can't work in isolation. You have to figure out what you're optimizing for and then kind of work together, pull in all the expertise. It's no longer like a one expert program anymore. It's a team effort. And it comes back to this question, like, what are we trying to design for? Is it fairness for everybody? Is it so that we're compliant, or is it actually something to help people, recharge a little bit, or reward them with a different environment, or be flexible, or whatever it is? Because I've also seen these kind of programs where people go to other offices. So rather than any random place in the world, they just go to a different site for a month or whatever it is. But again, it's what are you trying to optimize for? And taking the life cycle into account. So going back, if I was onboarding someone, maybe I do want to let them work from another office. So if I'm supporting warehouses, but I'm actually in a headquarters building, maybe it would be great for me to have some kind of workation in another country where there is a warehouse that I will be supporting. I get to know the people, but I also get to know the culture. Yeah. And, my family understands what I do, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, not a huge gaffe, but potentially could have been a very costly mistake in terms of both attracting people and getting them to stay and pass probation if they're not around. And then on the other side, potentially allowing people to leave that you can't find.
So not a fan of the workation.
Yes. No. I mean, if we change the title and align it to something, I'm fine for it.
Maybe,
but yeah.
Amazing. Well, Steve, thanks so much for it. Great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening. Yeah, if you can, please subscribe on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube.